Hello friends, Anderson here, and welcome back to Aina, the world that houses the city of Coleraine, which we have been building over the last 4 episodes now. And today it is all about history of our factions and their interactions, which also then carry some implications on the location of the city of Coleraine. We've already gleaned a lot of history from our previous building sessions. Among other things, we've learned that this used to be the home of the gods that was conquered by the sentient peoples when they chafed too much under the oppressive yoke of the old pantheon. At least that's the story they're telling, and we're sticking to it. But we need a little more detail, specifically maybe also about more recent historical events. We already know of a worldwide one where there was a fairly recent war that brought forth the Elonate Commonwealth as a coalition against the prosperity of Chandra, but there is more to learn. And before we get to that, we get back to the comment section, because we have gotten some more illuminations on the happenings in the previous videos and some thoughts and some feedback and some naming suggestions. So let's get right to them. This is mostly about the Tieflings, or the Hellhorns, the Damned, the Shadowkin, the Dark Ones, the question mark. I think one of the things that happened on when reading through the naming suggestion that you kindly provided me, and thanks very much for that. Keep the comments coming, keep on liking, keep on subscribing, it really helps, thanks. The thing that struck me the most was, what do we even base this decision on what we name them? And for that, I think we need to know a little bit more about their origin. So I started thinking about the origin of the Tieflings, as we will still call them for now. And specifically this idea of the Damned gave me a bit of pause, because that is almost a judgment call on their status, on the state of their alignment. They're damned, fallen from grace somehow. And that linked up with the idea that Daraja, the goddess that is currently the dominant force of righteousness in Coleraine and beyond, originated on the continent that now houses the prosperity of Chandra. And we assume that in her own cultural origin, she is one of the people from there, now ascended to godhood. But that was before there was a prosperity of Chandra, and now the prosperity of Chandra is governed mostly by those Tieflings, so why not connect the two? So the idea here is that when the gods' war happened, a massive host from that location, from that continent that is now the prosperity of Chandra, led by Daraja and Chandra, arrives here, and they bring down one of the divines. Daraja, through her actions and the free-floating divine essence, ascends to godhood, and the hosts that she was with, the army and Chandra, they catch a very different fallout from that divine being dying. Or as I phrase it here, the Daraja, the righteous, ascends to divine status while part of her army catches a heavy dose of divine mutagen from a dying god, becoming something distinct from their original human form. So there were no Tieflings or Damned or Hell-blooded or Shadowkin before this, but they were created as a consequence, and maybe even as a persistence, of this one particular divine, who now lives on through the taint that is manifested through the prosperity of Chandra, which the prosperity themselves might not even be aware of, that they basically are the lifeline of a floating divine scattered to the winds that maybe wants to come back as well, and there our cult cabal comes in again. And that conquering host, when the goddess fell, warped, turned, Tieflings emerged, at least the survivors did. They returned to their home nation, conquered it, now in their own agenda, and that became the prosperity of Chandra, with Chandra the first opulence, the first leader of the prosperity. And voila, we have Tieflings. So let's let that ruminate a little bit more now that we have that idea. I think the likelihood that other folk call them the Damned is quite high in the light of that. But maybe you have some, now that we know where they come from, maybe you have some more sharpened view on the terminology. So if you have another idea what we could label our tieflings, I'm all ears. We also don't really have a name for our magical MacGuffin divine essence yet, and there was a suggestion to call it God's blood. And this blood suffix, I think that's what you call it, is one thing that gave me a bit of pause, because I think there are two themes emerging now in the creation of this. One of blood as a consequence of the divines dying, and one of this more ethereal essence as a consequence of the divines coming into being. So I am somewhat reluctant to mix the two themes, which is why I don't really think God's blood would be my preferred choice for the MacGuffin, but I definitely like the drift of it. I think we'll see it again in some shape or form, but I think the blood component, this blood theme versus the ethereal / pure theme, the biological versus the ethereal, that is something that could very much play up this old pantheon on the rise and then their corruption and their fall, and that turns into this whole biological mess of tainted resources and warped mutagens of a magical nature now as a residue of theirs floating around, sort of as a stepping stone between the two, this MacGuffin. So we still don't have a name yet, but we do have a bit of a more sharp view on this blood theme. And this is the kind of thing that always helps me, keeping that in mind and drilling those themes out of the worlds that we're building makes it a lot easier for me to then sharpen the themes a bit and play them up and give the parties that are involved in the stories connected to those themes a more appropriate styling. So this blood thing, especially in conjunction with the old gods, now we're hitting up on the bloodborne fear, the old blood Lawrence fear it again, but it kind of goes in that direction. So the blood, the corruption, all of that, I think that'll play a big part in the campaign in some way, shape or form, at least in our surroundings. Not necessarily that our sword and sorcery thief that will just have to somehow survive from day to day and make a dishonest living will maybe come into contact with any of that, but maybe they will. So maybe we're gonna have nasty surprises when robbing a temple or something like that. So some blood creature and something the Cabal controls. The possibilities are there and I like them. Now, we also hit upon some follow-ups that we need to do, which I agree with. We need to understand who the High Noble is that is currently the rebel against the surrogate, who is then in turn controlled to some extent by Jezebeth. We need to probably know a little bit more about the Tinkerer deity, because that came up in discussion about the Artificer Guild, which also needs a name, and there the idea was maybe they name themselves after this Tinkerer deity, where I'm thinking maybe, but then we need to know more about this deity, because my picture so far has always been that the artificers that originally formed the kernel of that guild emerging when the god died were more like servitors, almost slaves. So would they take that name? Maybe, but then maybe with some kind of ironic twist. I think I'll also leave that up to the ideas to come forth, but we need to know more about this deity first. And we also need to know more about the deity that fell and caused the tieflings to come forth, because that might help us come up with a name. So let's dig in there before we start with the history. Let's define a rebellious high noble and two old pantheon gods, two more, and then we'll take it from there into the histories. I think with our rebellious high noble, the first order of business is determine an origin in our origin table. So let's see what we get. We get a 52, which is a high elf. Have you heard of the high elves? I have heard of the high elves. I've also heard that we need a name, and we have elf names. So let us elf name with a die 6 to determine the appropriate gender designation. 43 and a 2, that is the 2 on our female table. Ilanis. Isn't that ironic? Ilanis. Sounds perfectly noble to me. Now this is where I'd like to use this characterization table from Worlds Without Number, but I do have to supply the caveat that this is, I think, only the quote-unquote paid section of the book. So there are no tools like that in the free version. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm not 100% on this, but as far as I'm remembering, this latter section, like the 300s pages, are only in the premium paid version, which is 100% worth it, don't get me wrong. Like, this is definitely an infinite source of entertainment and creativity, but just be aware if you're following along and you're trying to find this in free copy, it might not be there. And this is another one roll, so we need all the dice in the 4 to 20 span, and we roll them all. Alright, that's the roll, let's dig in. Die 4, general physical build, that's a 2. Unremarkably average. Well, that's off to a good start. So Ilanis is not unusually short, plump, bulky, just general, typical high elf. Fair enough. Probably literally fair enough. The way they move. 4. Sharp, brisk, vigorous movements. Now that is the kind of zest that I expect from a rebellious high noble. Our die 8 is a 1. Clothing idiosyncrasies. A fondness for very bright or dull colors. Well, bright or dull, what is it now? Definitely makes a difference sort of in the portrayal of the character, so 50-50. 51 plus it's bright. 52, it's a subdued kind of brightness. Fondness for bright colors. Die 10 is a 7. The first thing noticed, they're abnormally friendly or reserved. Friendly, is it a very outgoing person, or reserved, is it like this new surrogate is too much a person of the people, I turn my nose up at them. 50-50 again. 51 plus is friendly. 33, reserved. So we have somebody who is very, well, maybe not uncharismatic, but perhaps very status conscious and doesn't just do the whole approachability thing very well. The die 12 is a 12. One way they differ from expectation, a distinct mutation or body alteration. Ooh-hoo-hoo. This could of course be a magical, how about this is a device? How about this is like some divine essence driven prosthetic arm or voice box? I'll think about this, but I think I will put down replaced one of their body parts with a device, with a essence-driven device. That's nice. Okay. And the die 20 is a 4. Visible mannerisms or trait talks very slowly and deliberately. This actually paints a very nice picture. So a very reserved, deliberate, brisk, vigorous person with a fondness for bright colors, but this is more like a fashion statement then. Maybe it's the royal purple, showing off wealth, status. Yeah, that's a picture with some implications as well. So there are some things we can derive from what kind of person portrays themselves like this. Nice. I like this this table. We have some more. Like, you can go really deep with burning ambitions and close friendships and troubled romances and personal tragedies and all of that. I would add those if we get to the point where this person actually becomes directly important for our character. Well, perhaps the ambition we should dig into. Mainly also because I want to play with this system a little bit. So let's do a quick burning ambitions roll. One roll again, see what kind of operator this Ilanis is, and maybe if we do like the outcome, which I'm sure we will, we might also revisit, maybe in a further video then, our other relevant people that we've so far established and build their ambitions. Maybe also when we hit upon a history where it becomes relevant, we just quickly supply some ambitions, because this actually looks pretty good. I'm still a bit unfamiliar with this. Also, there's so much stuff in here. You can probably do like a 100-part world building series and never actually get to play, which is a risk. I already spy a 20 here, so let's dig in. When was the ambition sparked? The ambition, of course, being replace the surrogate, the current surrogate. And we so far suspected that the driving force behind the ambition is that the current surrogate is not a noble. And by replace, I also leave it open whether Ilanis actually wants herself to be the permanent new surrogate, or whether she just wants this upstart peasant gone. And when was the ambition sparked? 3, it came after mature adulthood. I guess given the average elven lifespan, that does make sense since it was a recent ascension. Die 6, who knows or has been involved in it besides Jezebeth? 2, they have a partner with a similar goal. I mean, yes, they do. We don't really need to flesh out more of that, because we just decide that this partner is Jezebeth, since we already decided that anyway. Now it gets interesting. The die 8, what tools are used to advance the ambition? That's an 8. Government authority is somehow enlisted. Also makes sense. We already had the hunch that the current surrogate is somewhat surrounded by a hard core of supporters, but that there is an almost equally large amount of people that are a bit more skeptical. So she has her workings through the Rajan assemblage, she has allies, she has a faction in the assemblage then. Writing this down as she leads an opposing faction in the assemblage, because that seems to make sense. The die 10 is a 4. What's the basic ambitions form? To obtain glory or get fame for a skill. Well, that is somewhat contradictory. I think that is probably more of a, if you haven't got a firm grasp on what the ambition is. So I think we can overrule this one, because to win political power or a particular office is clearly the basic form. Of course, we don't know whether it's power for the sake of power or something of the sort, but I don't think she's playing this Game of Thrones just to show off how well she is at, or how skilled she is at playing it. So I'm overruling this one. The die 12, what is the biggest immediate obstacle? A disinterested third party is blocking the way. Okay. Now, I think this is another matter of stability versus instability, and the goals of Jezebeth and her black marketeers versus the goals of the guild that controls the supply of our magical divine essence, which means that probably also this is where maybe Jezebeth's buy-in comes from. The guild is having none of this. The guild just wants the government to be stable and to stay out of the way, and to not interfere with the guild and its station of authority as the party that keeps the lights on. And so the guild is not a supporter of Ilanis. The guild supports the surrogate, and without the support of the guild, even if you have the black marketeers on your side, things are going to become very, very difficult. So the guild itself does have no interest in even hearing Ilanis' complaints out, and so that is a major blocking point. And lastly, die 20, a 20, that should be interesting. Things to help or hinder the ambition. 20, reluctant rival partner in their ambition. A rival partner? That doesn't sound like it's Jezebeth, so who is it? And is it helping or hindering? If it's a rival partner, probably a bit of both. I don't know at the moment. If you know, let me know. Because, you know, that's an opening for another character to enter the picture, or maybe to tie in another character that we've already learned about. But right now, it's not that important. I'll just leave it blank and leave it up to you. If you want to chip in and have an idea, then feel free. And that is Ilanis. I wonder if we're getting any history done at this rate, but, you know, again, it's probably also helping us build the history later. So we need some gods up in here. Let's start with the Tiefling origin deity, because I am very, very curious what this was, what deity fell and created the fell-blooded. I think we do not really need to worry too much about the origin, because the old pantheon came into being as sort of the first act of creation of sentience on this world, I think. Which, of course, again, is like turtles all the way down, who created them, but that we'll worry about that later. Or maybe we don't worry about that at all. So we just go about the die 20 table of what does this god do in society, meaning in the old society when the old pantheon was still in charge of the fate of this world. We roll 18. It protects the soul in the afterlife. Oh wow, they killed a god / goddess that was more like a shepherd of the dead. Well, isn't that cheerful? I am going for my Perilous Wilds again, and now we're going to add a further die to our equation, because I'm just going to add a die 4. We have 4 tables. We have 2 columns for names in each table, so we'll roll a d4, a die 6, and a die percentage to understand which name we're picking. That's an 82 on the 4th table in the first column, which is a Tanaya. Tanaya. So Tanaya fell and was the guardian of souls to protect the souls in the afterlife. So why kill him? Because he was fighting, of course. Because he was joining the other deities in their war, or was he? Because that sounds like a very neutral kind of god. I have an idea, and I think I need another name, and I think I need another name from the same table that we just got Tanaya from. Let's roll this one. That's a 60 and a 5, so second column 60, Ofra. Okay, Tanaya and Ofra. Why am I rolling a second name? Because I think these two deities are one and the same. They are, one is the one that protects the souls from the other. So Ofra was the one that preyed on souls, that devoured souls or enslaved them in the afterlife. And Tanaya wasn't having any of this and protected souls from Ofra's predations. And I think they're both part of the same coin. So they're basically, as gods sometimes are, they are two facets of the same creature. And when the uprising happened, Ofra was raging and took the side of the gods immediately. And Tanaya was sort of reluctant and didn't immediately step in, but was defending himself. And I think the reason for the schism of the idea here that one is devouring, one is protecting, is the role of the sentients in the eyes of the old pantheon, who created them with a specific purpose just to serve, without a will of their own, not acknowledging that the will of their own also bears some dangers, but giving the will to make them more independent and to make them less high maintenance, and that snowballed into a rebellion. So Tanaya was basically the one that at the end of a life of servitude went, well, now you've done enough, I protect you, I ferry you to your just reward. And Ofra was the aspect, the ungrateful, divine aspect of, well, you know, used to me now physically dead, but at least I can eat you and then derive some sustenance and some pleasure from that. And this is kind of a conjoined twin deity idea. So Ofra also scheming then to drag Tanaya into the war against the living beings, manages to entrap Tanaya in this final battle. They fall together, and this mixture of the two, Tanaya's essence mostly becomes what is now Daraja, and Ofra's essence bleeds into Chandra and the host of Chandra, and that becomes the Tieflings. I should probably write this down. So now we know. Ofra, the devourer of souls, is the essence that is infusing the host of Chandra that then becomes the Tieflings. If that gives you an idea for a name, shoot. Which leaves the Tinkerer. We do the thing again with the 4 tables and the name. We are back on the 4th table in the first column with a 48, kind of tilted tip there a little bit. What's 48? That's Gunardi. I can get behind a tinker deity called Gunardi. Here we know what the god does do in society, and we also know the origin. But I'd like to give it some additional flavor just with this natural principle human concern table as an additional aspect of this particular god. Maybe that gives us some better idea of the manifestation of these devices. That is a 17, theft or crime. I do believe that was already covered by Irwan, but that was previously. Or natural principles, sun, moon, or I mean sun, moon, or stars. So it's all kind of astronomical and the spheres and very. My association is sort of brass and lenses and things like that. So yeah, I don't think the sun god necessarily. It's just a concern of Gunardi was also the heavenly bodies. I don't think there's literally a sun god or goddess. That's more like too much of a force. I think the gods are kind of a scale below that, but Gunardi was always sort of tied into that natural principle and worked through it. So how do we narrow it down now a little bit with the idea that was this a horrible or a somewhat benevolent old deity? Maybe we can look at the particular religious requirements and so free associate from there. What was Gunardi asking his followers to do? Make sacrifices that society finds hateful. If I now put myself into the spot of the old world where the old pantheon rules, society is like everybody outside of Gunardi's immediate circle. And so the servitors of Gunardi had to do things that the rest of them disapproved of, which then could kind of set them apart as maybe even siding relatively late with the rebellion, since they were sort of outcast pariah, and they were only kept around because they're useful. That's also why they maybe don't have a powerful station as one of the factions. They are very much an attachment to the guild that controls the resource. They have a right to the resource, but they are also expected to keep the lights on, keep the workings on, keep things running, and maintain everything. But they are always regarded with a little bit of distrust and this memory of these ones did something horrendous. So the Gunardi following that became the artificers, yeah, interesting. They were actually closer to their god than to the other sentients. Oh, well, maybe also what if they then, to prove their loyalty to everybody else, killed Gunardi, but they didn't, not really. That loyalty aspect, that whole like setting them apart and things makes me wonder, like, did Gunardi think, everything's lost, let my servitors kill me but preserve me in some kind of machinery, and then through them the greatest working of the artificers that they work on in secrets to bring Gunardi back? Because that's also a theme I'm sensing in this whole world again, is that everybody that is kind of a dick in the society wants to bring some old god back. But this could very well also be one of the foundations of the Cabal. So maybe the head artificer is a founding member and still a current member of the Cabal. I like that. Gunardi made his followers kill him and turned his spirit into a grand device, the grandest project of the artificers, whose leader is a Cabal member, is to bring Gunardi back. If that gives you a spark for a name for this guild, beyond artificers, hit me. So much for we're going to do some history today. We pretty much mostly did other stuff, but important stuff. So that's okay. We add to our world, we just need to find an end eventually, but this helps us find an end. I think this gives us a much sharper focus and also brings out some more themes. So the mission statement for the history is assigned to important historical events to each group or nation, and this is the tables 138, and it's used to connect them, and well, we can add even more, but this is more the high level history. So let's take it from the top. Let's start with the Rajan assemblage, because they're probably the easiest to connect to everything else since they're the government. They're kind of a local presence, they're always here. And we roll on this one. 29. External war. The group faced war with some external enemy or rival nation with grave consequences. So we already had the suspicion that various nations were interested in conquering Coleraine and that they always played off the factions against each other and so remained independent. But maybe they weren't always successful in remaining independent throughout history. So maybe in somewhat recent memory, the city of Coleraine actually was a vassal to another nation. The question is, does that nation still exist? And what are the grave consequences? At some point in history, Coleraine was effectively vassalized by a stronger force. That's the determination. So they lost the external war. Question is, who are they fighting and how did the grave consequences manifest? The grave consequences could of course be that they used sort of a last resort means to free themselves of the vassalage and sort of used a very powerful device, but maybe inadvertently using that funneled some power to Gunnardi? I'm thinking like some upstart empire comes up, not the prosperity of Chandra, I think that would be a bit too easy. They lose sight of all measure and they conquer Coleraine because they want all of the magical resource, they want all the devices, they occupy Coleraine, and Coleraine blows them up, blows up their homeland, creates a wasteland somewhere in the world out there and calls it peace. And to do that, they turn to the artificers and ask them, hey, you got something stored away that can free us from this? And the artificers go, and the Cabal in turn goes, well, yes, we do. Just push this little red button here and nothing bad will come of it. And the grave consequences are maybe all of that wiped out life force now is stored in some capacitor that is potentially something the Cabal can use to bring some divine back, even for just a brief moment. The assemblage turns to the artificers who create a magic nuke that wipes the homeland of the oppressors out. The life essence is leached and stored and is now at the disposal of the Cabal's nefarious plans. That sounds like grave consequences to me. Do we need a name for the oppressing nation? Let's give it one, because I did bring some naming tables. Let's go again with the specific city names, 1 to 3, 4 to 6, and a die 20. This one, 19, Wisland. Okay, Wisland got wiped out. Now, let's give them a second one, because now we've also connected this to the Cabal, which of course is already kind of helpful. 61 new rulers. The group's former ruling dynasty was replaced either peacefully through intrigue or perhaps through outright conquest. Well, we already know that the blood of Daraja died out and that was the dynasty, and that the Rajan assemblage is the placeholder, nominally at least, that pretend that they just keep the seat warm until the Raja's blood returns. Does that help us? Because there is no blood of Daraja left, or is there? What other faction can we drag into this? Maybe there's like the ultimate card that one of the other factions can play, and I think the only one that's been around long enough is the Prosperity or the Guild, really, the Magic Resource Guild, or the Cabal. Because what I'm thinking is, maybe at the cusp of removing like the claimant that says I have like a drop of the Rajan blood, I'm the new emperor, and the assemblage coming together and wanting to stabilize Coleraine. They needed some outside help, and they turned to the Prosperity, or they turned to the Cabal, or they turned to the Magical Resource Guild, and that debt is still kind of dangling, and it's never been called. Well, we have 3 options, let's just roll. So Magic Resource Guild 1 and 2, Prosperity of Chandra 3 and 4, Cult Cabal 5 and 6. Who did the government call on to become the new government? He called on the Cabal, okay. So the Cabal has some kind of leverage over the government still in some, well, actually probably then as the guise of this Church of Viola. And they can leverage this at some point to thwart whatever is going on here. We also have one holdover from the Rajan assemblage creation, I think, which was that a grand scheme has gone horribly wrong. We also need to figure that one out still. So maybe with one of the other factions we can flesh that out. But unfortunately I've dallied so long on the various deities and creating our rebellious high noble and kind of free associating some more metaphysics that I am out of time for today. So we'll have more history building next time, and then more follow-ups on your ideas, and then maybe one more, and then we're done. And then we can start playing Scarlet Heroes a few weeks from now. But first I also want to still have somebody make a map of this city for me. So that's still in the works. So stay tuned, thanks for watching, and bye for now.